I will now begin my exterior inspection. I will begin with lenses. I have 5 lenses on top and 2 on the bottom. I will inspect that light lenses or covers are the proper color, they're clean, not broken, and not missing. I will now unlatch my vehicle on both sides. Once they're unlatched on both sides, I will lift the cover. Now that the cover of my vehicle is open, I will move on to my passenger side motor compartment. I will start my critical fluid levels, starting with my coolant reservoir, that it is between the add and full marks, properly capped with no visible or audible leaks. I have hoses, they're not ripped or frayed, clamped on both sides. No visible or audible leaks. I will not move on to the driver's side of my engine compartment. I start with my critical fluid levels in the driver's side motor compartment. I start with my power steering fluid reservoir, that it is between the add and full marks, making sure it is properly capped with no visible or audible leaks, hoses leaving my power steering reservoir are properly clamped on both sides and there are no signs of any visible or audible leaks. I will also check my dipstick and filler tube, making sure both my dipstick and filler tube are properly capped with no visible leaks. I will also check the oil level by checking the dipstick. I will pull out the dipstick, wipe it, then put it back in and take it out once more to see the level. If I needed to be filled more, I would do so by filling it through the filler tube. I will inspect engine for fluid and air leaks by checking to make sure there are no puddles on the ground, that there aren't any dripping fluids around or on the underside of the engine and transmission. I will inspect hoses and air lines for any damages and leaks, making sure I do not hear any leaks or see any drippings on my engine compartment. I now move on to my steering system. I have my steering column, my steering box, my pitman arm, my drag link, my upper control arm on the inside. I will then make sure that all steering hoses and connections are not cracked, worn, or leaking and have no visible or audible leaks, that the steering system has no missing nuts, bolts, or cutter keys. I will also make sure my castle nuts and cutter keys are present on both sides. I'm also going to check the pitman arm, drag link, upper control arm, and steering rod and or column from the steering box to the wheel are not worn, cracked, and that the joints and sockets are not worn or loose. I will now be moving on to my tires. Front tires should have a tread depth of no less than 430 seconds and the rear should be at 230 seconds. I will check with a tread depth gauge. I will be checking tire inflation, inspecting for proper inflation using a tire gauge, that the SI is 82/100 SI or manufactured specified. I will also make sure all valve stems are accessible. Make sure that valve caps are not missing and valve stems are not damaged or broken. Now I will check tire condition, inspecting for cuts and damage that expose tire tread and sidewall. Look for bumps and bulges in the sidewall and no audible leaks. I will now be moving on to my rim. I will check for damaged, cracked, or bent trims. Rims cannot have welding repairs. I inspect studs and bolt holes to make sure they are not elongated and there are no missing or loose nuts or bolts. I move on to my lug nuts. I will check my lug nuts and make sure they are all present. I will make sure that the lug nuts are not loose and there are no signs of rust or shiny threads that may show looseness and that there are no broken studs. I will now move on to my suspension system. I will first check my leaf springs, inspecting that they are not missing, shifted, cracked, or broken, that spring mounts are not cracked, broken, or missing any parts. Inspect that the shock absorber is secure, not damaged, and shows no signs of visible or audible leaking. Then finally I will go back to the front of my vehicle and check that the vehicle is sitting level, front to rear and side to side. I will now move on to my brake system. I will now check my brake lines and hoses. I will check that there are no visible or audible leaks. I will check to make sure they are not cracked, worn, or frayed hoses or lines and clamped on both sides. I move on to inspect brake contaminants. I inspect drums and pads for black residue that could be grease, oil, or metal-to-metal friction, or white residue that means a fire extinguisher was used. We now move on to the side of my vehicle. I move to my traffic monitoring devices, making sure that the mirrors are clean and not cracked with no illegal stickers to obstruct my view, that my mirror brackets are not bent and are mounted securely with no missing parts. I inspect my battery and electrical system. I make sure that my batteries are secure, if visible, that all connections are tight and should not show signs of excessive corrosion. I inspect all electrical cables and lines are secure, not cracked or worn, and properly connected. I also check the battery box cover or door is secure. I move on to my fuel tanks, both my fuel and DEF tanks. I will check they are securely mounted, caps are tight, and that there are no visible or audible leaks from tanks, that all lines are secured and showing no signs of any visible or audible leaks. I move to my frame and inspect for cracks, broken welds, holes, or other damage to the frame members, making sure everything's leveled. I move on to my rear tractor. I'll check my last set of lenses and reflectors. I'll look to make sure that lenses or covers are the proper color, clean, not broken, and not missing. I have another set of reflectors that are red and white in color, covering at least 50% of my vehicle. With this, I conclude my pre-trip exterior inspection. Join our Class A or Class B training course, and then you can also say, I graduated from Emotion Trucking School.